So we're going to begin to frame our building, and I've already changed this so that the framing annotation set is active as well as the framing layer set. The framing layer set has turned off all of the cabinet layers, but there's a couple of layers still left that I may want to turn off, like the window labels and the door labels, as well as the fixtures. There may be instances where you want to refer to these things as you frame the building, but for now we'll go ahead and turn them off by going to our layer display options. I'll select a layer and type F for fixtures. That'll take me right down to the F's in the list, and I'll just turn off interior fixtures. Then I'll type W, turn off the window labels, then type D, come down to doors and turn off the door labels, and go ahead and click OK. To build framing, we'll go to the General Framing Tools and to Build Framing. In the Build Framing tool, on the foundation level, you can build the first floor framing. On the first floor, you can build the second floor framing as well as the ceiling framing above the first floor. On the second floor, you can build the ceiling framing. You also have wall framing as well as roof framing. But before you build your framing, you'll want to check your framing defaults. We'll go to the Default button here and double-click on Framing. This opens up a dialog that looks very much like the Build Framing tool. And really, you could set the defaults with the Build Framing tool. It's accessing this exact same information. The Build Framing tool gets its information from 3 different places. The defaults that you set up here, as well as the wall type definition for the framing material here, and the rooms themselves. When we set up the defaults for rooms and normal room, we set up the floor structure to determine the depth of the framing as well as the sheathing layer. We also set up the ceiling structure and the depth for the ceiling structure. So the depth of the framing is set up in the room defaults. But if we go back to the framing defaults, on the foundation panel, we set up the defaults for the floor framing for the first floor level. Here we set up the joist width as well as the spacing of the joists. The floor structure here is following those room defaults. You also have options to change your rim joist width and type. On the first floor panel, you'll set up the defaults for the ceiling framing above the first floor and the second floor framing, including the joist width and spacing and how they will bear on beams or walls. If we go to the wall defaults, you can see that we're using the wall framing material. That again is determined by the wall type definition and the material used in the wall. You can override that by unchecking this box and changing the stud thickness and the stud spacing. If we go to openings, we can change the header sizes for all of the openings, the doors and windows. Right now, for spans less than 49 inches, it'll use the depth of 5.5. For 73 inches, 7.25, and so on. The number of headers and the thickness of headers are set up in the door and window defaults. If we place a manual beam, you can edit the size and type of beams that you'll use, either for your floor beams or your roof beams. You can also choose the posts, type, and size, as well as the shape of the footing and the size of footing. For your roof defaults, you can change the rafter and outlook spacing, as well as the depth of the roof layers. The surface of this roof is 1/8 of an inch asphalt roofing over 1/2 of an inch of OSB sheathing. The structure itself is the depth of the rafter. This is set up for 2x10 rafters. The ceiling, as you can see here, is using the room ceiling finish. Here you determine the width of the rafters as well as the size of the ridge and the fascias. If you're building with trusses, you can determine the size of the top and bottom cords and the webbing. Now that we've set up our framing defaults, I'll go ahead and click OK, click on Done, and then we'll start by building the first floor framing. To build the first floor framing, we'll want to be on the foundation level. Now we'll go to the Framing Tools parent tool and the Build Framing tool. In the foundation panel, you'll build the floor framing for the first floor level, the level above you. I'll go ahead and click on Build Framing. We'll leave all of the settings as we set up in the defaults and click OK. Chief will automatically frame the floor, and the joist direction is determined by the shortest width. Let's take a look at this with another one of our camera tools. In the camera tools, you have the Framing Overview. In the Framing Overview, we can see all of the floor framing we've just built. But I want to make a change to this floor framing. I'm going to undo to remove the floor framing, and then I want to turn on the reference display because I need to see where the walls are on the floor above me. With reference floor display, these are displayed in red. What I want to do here is create some bearing walls in the foundation level. So I'll go up to my Wall Tools parent tool, and I'll use the Interior Wall tool. I'll simply trace over the red lines so that my foundation walls are aligned with my first floor walls. I'll create one there, and I'll create another one here. Now I want to make sure that this wall is aligned with the wall above it. So I'll click on that Align with Wall Above tool, do the same thing for this one. And this one's already aligned, I can tell because of those aqua colored lines. Now I'll select this wall and double click on it, and the first thing I want to do is make sure that there's a footing underneath this wall. So here in the General panel, I'll click on the Foundation Wall button. That will put a concrete footing underneath it. Then I want to go to the Structure panel. I want the floor joist to bear on this wall, so I need to designate this as a bearing wall. I'll go ahead and click OK now, and then we'll turn off the reference display, and then I'll rebuild the framing. Go to my Framing Tools, on the foundation level, Build Floor Framing. In the Build Framing tool, you do have the option to turn on the automatic Build Floor and Ceiling Framing. If this is turned on, then every time we make a change in the plan, whether I move a wall or add a wall, Chief will regenerate all of the framing. I'll go ahead and click OK now, and as you can see, the floor joists now are lapping over that bearing wall instead of continuing all the way through. But I want to make one more change. In these areas, I want the framing to go the other direction. So I'll click Undo to remove the framing, and then I'll select this wall and this wall, open them up, go to the Structure panel, and make these bearing walls as well. I also want to place a footing underneath those walls. Now if I were to build the framing again, the framing is going in the opposite direction, and it is using this wall as the bearing wall. But I want these joists to go up and down, and these joists to go from side to side. So I'll need to create a joist direction line. I'll go ahead and click Undo again, and here in my Framing Tools I have the Joist Direction. To create a joist direction line, you'll simply click and drag a line in the direction that you want the joist to go. So for these two areas, I want to go in this direction. In this area, I want to go right and left, as well as this area. Because the bearing wall is separating these two areas, I'll need to make sure to put a joist direction line in both of these areas. Now we'll go back to our Build Framing tool, build the floor framing again. Now as you can see, these floor joists are going up and down, and they lap over the bearing wall, and then these floor joists in these two areas are going right and left. Now we'll go up to the first floor level, and we'll build the floor framing above the first floor level for the second floor. But again, I want to make these two walls bearing walls. So I'll select this one, open it up, go to the Structure panel, and make this the bearing wall. And select this one, and do the same thing. And again, we'll use that joist direction line. Go to the Build Framing tool, go to the first floor level, and build the floor framing. Now the framing in this area has not built, and the reason why is because remember that on the second floor we created an open below room for this entire area, so there's no floor platform underneath the second floor here. Now we can build the wall framing. I could build the wall framing for all of the walls in that Build Framing tool. However, you can also build the framing for each individual wall. I'll go ahead and click Undo, and then select one single wall. In your Edit toolbar at the bottom, you have your Build Framing for Selected Object tool. This will build a framing for this one single wall. Also, after you've built the framing for your walls, you can select a wall, and you have a tool down here to open the wall detail. That will open up the elevation detail of the framing. With this elevation detail, you can edit the framing. You can move the framing or change the size. However, if you go back to the floor plan view and reframe that wall, it'll reframe it with all of the defaults just as it did the first time. I'll go ahead and frame all of the walls using my Build Framing tool. And then we'll take a look at where we can find the wall framing details. If you go up to your project browser and then go to Wall Details and click on the arrow, you can now see that on each floor, Chief has created a wall detail for every single wall, and it's numbered all of the walls. To reference the wall numbers, you can turn on the Wall Label layer. Then you can see the wall detail number that references this wall detail. If I click on this wall and open up the wall detail, you can see that for the garage door, it's using a double trimmer and a single king stud. If I click on the header and double click, you can see that this is a 2x12 header. These are determined by the door specification. If I double click here on the door and go to Framing, this is where you can choose how you want the door or window to frame. For trimmers, it's using 2 trimmers. It's using the default header that's set up in your door defaults. However, you can override this by unchecking the box for default. If we want to use a 6x12 header over this garage, I'll change this to a count of 1 header that's 5.5 inches thick and 11.25 inches tall. Now I can select that wall and click on the Build Framing for the selected objects. When I go back to the Framing detail, if I double click here on the header, you can see that I now have 1 header that's 5.5 inches wide by 11.25. Now let's take a look at another option for our floor framing. I'll go back down to the foundation level, and here, instead of a bearing wall, I'll go ahead and delete this wall, and notice when I delete the wall, it deletes the wall framing as well. And here, I'll delete the floor framing so that we can see more clearly what I'm doing. To delete the floor framing, I'll go to my Edit drop-down menu to delete objects, and here I'll click on All Floors and click on Floor and Ceiling Framing, and then hit the Delete button. That'll delete all of my floor framing. So here, instead of a bearing wall, what I want to place is a beam. So again, I'll turn on my reference display, and then I'll go up here to, instead of the general framing tools, I'll go to the floor and ceiling framing tools. You also have roof framing tools. So here under the floor and ceiling framing tools, I have a floor and ceiling beam. With this tool, you simply click and drag a line to form the center line of the beam that you want to place. And now I want to center this beam on that first floor wall. So I'll go up to the first floor level, and then I'll draw a construction line. Then I'll select the line, and then center it on the wall. Now I use my copy and paste tool. The hotkey for this is to hold down my Control key, and here I'm going to hit the X to cut it from this floor, and then I'll go down to the foundation level, go up to the Edit drop-down menu, down to the Paste menu, and Paste Hold Position. It'll place that construction line in the exact same place on the foundation level. Now I can select my beam, use my Center Object tool, and then click on that line to center it perfectly within that wall. I'll go ahead and delete the line, and then I want to create a beam pocket. So I'll select the beam, click and drag it so that it goes into the foundation wall. I'll pan over here to this side and go ahead and turn off the Wall Labels layer, and then I'll select the beam. I'll need to tab to get to it, and then click and drag it so that it goes all the way through the wall. Now I'm going to reframe my walls. I'll go to the Framing tool, go to the wall, and Build Wall Framing. And notice that where this beam is going in for a wall pocket, Chief has automatically placed a post in that wall. I'll select the wall, and let's take a look at the wall detail. This is where the beam will come into the wall. I'll go ahead and close this, and we'll close the project browser. And then I want to take a back-clipped cross-section through here. And we can see here where the beam has been placed. It's below the floor platform where the floor joist will go. If I wanted this beam to be flush with the floor joist so that the floor joists hang off of it, I can double-click on this beam, Here I'm going to change the depth of the beam to 11 7/8, the same height as my floor joists. Then I'll lock the depth. Now I want to change the top height of the beam so that it's flush with the top of the floor joists. The sheathing is 3/4 of an inch. This number is relative to absolute 0, which is the top of the floor platform. So this number needs to be a negative 3/4 of an inch. When I click OK, that will push the beam up into the floor platform. Now we'll go back to the floor plan view, and then we'll take that beam and draw it all the way through to the other side of the building, and then we'll rebuild the floor framing. As you can see now, the floor joists come up to the beam and stop so that they hang on the side of the beam. If I go to that cross section again, go to my layer display options, and to framing, we'll turn on the floor joists, and you can see where the floor joists come up and hang right on the side of the beam. Now let's rebuild our wall framing. I'll go ahead and close this view, fill the window with the building, and then let's go up to the first floor level. Then we'll go back to the Build Framing tool, then we'll go to the first floor's panel, build the ceiling framing, and build the floor framing. Now the building's completely framed up with the exception of the roof framing. I'll go back to the floor plan, and we'll talk about roof framing. There's a couple of different ways to frame a roof. You can stick frame it with rafters and ceiling joists, or you can use roof trusses. Before I start my roof framing, what I might want to do is create a separate layer set that shows only the roof framing and none of the floor or ceiling framing. As you can see here, because this building has part of the roof bearing on the first floor walls and part of it bearing on the second floor walls, for my roof framing plan, I might want to display all of the roof planes on the same level, and then display the roof framing all by itself. To create a new framing layer set, I'll go to the Layer Display options, and I'll start with this framing set, but I'll copy this set, and we'll name this, and here I'm going to use all capital letters, Roof Framing Set, and click OK. Now in my layers, I'll select one of the layers and click on F to go down to the framing. Here I'm going to turn off all of the ceiling framing and all of the floor framing. I'll go ahead and turn off the deck framing as well. But I'll leave all of the roof framing on as well as the wall framing. And then we'll go up to where we have our active layer set, which is the framing set, and select our new roof framing layer set. The next thing I want to do is select these roof planes that are bearing on the first floor walls. Go down to my Edit toolbar and display them on the floor above. Then we'll go up to the second floor. Up on the second floor we can see all of my roof planes. Now we could frame each roof plane individually. If we select this roof plane, first of all let's go ahead and open up the specification dialog. In the specification dialog specific to this one roof plane, we could change the framing by going to the Structure panel and changing the rafter spacing, the maximum lookout, and the size of the rafters, the ridge, and the fascias. Once we're satisfied with the settings, then we can click on the Build Framing for Selected Object. That will frame just this one roof plane. Or we can do as we did with the floor framing, go to your Build Framing tool, go to the Roof panel, and click on Build Roof Framing. Again, these are going to set all of the defaults for the spacing and the size of the roof framing. We'll take a look again at that framing overview. But let's take a look at a different type of framing. On this building, we've used the framing defaults to stick frame with rafters and ceiling joists. But let's take a look at framing a building with trusses. I'll go ahead and close this view, and then we'll start a brand new plan. And I'll just draw a simple rectangular building. Then I'll just go ahead and build a simple gable end roof with a single ridge across the top. Now if I take a back clipped cross section through this, you can see that we have the flat ceiling and the 8 and 12 sloped roof. If I go back to the floor plan view, you can easily draw a truss by going to your roof framing tools. And in your roof framing tools, you could draw individual rafters, roof blocking, a roof beam, and you have a roof truss tool. We'll select the roof truss tool, and to draw a truss, we'll simply click and drag across the building to form a roof truss. And here, because I'm still in the default set in my new plan, the roof trusses are not turned on. I'll go ahead and click yes for now, just turn them on. And we'll take a look again at that cross section. The cross section is using the section view layer set. So in the section view layer set, we'll need to turn on the roof trusses here as well. The roof truss will build according to where the roof planes are placed and where the ceiling planes are placed. We'll go back to the floor plan view and then rebuild the roof, but this time we'll raise it up from the plate height 10 inches to allow for a 10-inch energy heel on our truss. Then we'll select the truss, use the Open Object tool, and click on Force Truss Rebuild to rebuild according to the way the roof is now built. And then click here to form an energy heel. Take a look again at that cross-section view. As you can see here, our truss now has an energy heel. Now let's create a truss of a different type. I'll go back to the floor plan view and delete this truss, and then we'll open up this room, go to the structure panel, and remove the flat ceiling over this room. And then we'll build manual ceiling planes to create a scissor type truss. To create a ceiling plane, we'll go back to the Roof Tools parent tool, and here you have your ceiling plane tool. This tool operates very much like the manual roof tool. The first step is to click and drag the baseline of the ceiling plane. We're going to drag this baseline right on the inside face of the main layer of the wall. Then release your mouse and the ceiling plane is still active. Now move towards the upslope direction and click where you want to stop. We've now created a manual ceiling plane. We'll create another one on this wall. Click and drag to form the baseline, release and move in the upslope direction. Then I'll select this roof plane and this roof plane and use my Open Object tool. The ceiling plane will build following the roof slope default. So here we're going to drop this down to a 6 and 12 pitch and click OK. Then we'll join the ridge of these two ceiling planes. I'll select this roof plane, click on my Join Roof Plane tool, and then click on this roof plane to join them at the ridge. We'll take a look again at that cross section. We now have the dropped ceiling plane at a little bit lower pitch and the higher roof plane. Now we'll go ahead and build another roof truss. Take a look again at that cross section view. The truss is building now according to the placement of our ceiling planes and our roof planes. Now we'll go back to the floor plan view and then select that truss, and I'll use this temporary dimension to move it 24 inches away from the wall. And then we need to copy it across the building. We can do this easily with our multiple copy tool. If we go to the multiple copy interval, you'll see here that all the trusses will be copied at 24 inches on center. You can change this to whatever you need. We'll leave it at 24 and click OK. The multiple copy tool is still active, so if we select that Move Edit handle on the truss and then just simply click and drag it across the building, Chief will replicate them all the way across the roof. Let's take a look again at a perspective framing overview. And you can see all of our trusses. The last thing we might want to do is copy this last truss and drag it right over the top of the wall, and then open that one up and designate it as an end truss. And when we go back to that framing overview, you can see that it'll frame that truss on the gable wall as an end truss. There are many other things that you can do with truss design in Chief Architect. You can learn more about all of the settings in the truss specification dialog and how to build specialty trusses in additional online training videos. We'll go ahead and close this plan up for now. We don't need to save it. And the next thing we want to do with our new project is to create a terrain and work with the tools to slope the lot.